Hello, everyone, and welcome to our special event today. My name is Don Carnevale. I'm the Director of Corporate Marketing here at NeoSystems. We're very excited to bring this session to you today, Enclave Unwrapped, the CMMC-Compliant solution for your business. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to hand off to my colleague, Greg Powers, who will get us going. Greg?
Thanks, Don. Really appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Looking forward to this conversation with everyone here as we discuss some CMMC compliant solutions, a few of our reference architectures, and specifically discuss some about our Enclave solutions. So my name is Greg Powers. I'm the Senior Director of Managed Security Solutions here at NeoSystems. David, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself as well? You're on mute, David.
My apology, David Carlino, Vice President of Security and Compliance at NeoSystems.
Great, thanks. All right, so David and I will be going through this presentation today. For those of you new to NeoSystems, I'm going to go really quickly who we are at NeoSystems, and then we'll get into the presentation. We've been in business for about 20 years. We have our whole book of business is supporting government contractors. So we like to say we live in the world of compliance. All of our customers require some type of compliance today. So this is something that we're kind of used to. We have four main lines of business, as you see from the slide there. Our systems integrations business works mostly with our customers that have the ERP solutions mostly in CostPoint, where we do implementations, we do extensibilities, we do support of the CostPoint solution. Our managed services unit, we do things, everything from a managed accounting services, manage HR, manage IT, manage payroll. So we provide all those services as well, again, all for government contractors. We also have our secure hosting solution. It's a ITAR, SOC 1, SOC 2, FedRAMP cloud that we host critical infrastructure for government contractors, hosting government contractor data. And then today, what we're mostly going to talk about is our managed security and CMMC's services and solutions business. Okay, so to kick it off, main reason we're talking about this is because, as we know, not all government contractors are built the same. We have contractors with different size business, everything from 1 or 2 employees all the way up to the several thousands. Contractors that have different lines of business, work with different agencies. Some do commercial work as well. So with the contractors all having these different types of business lines, well, then not all solutions can be the same, the compliance solutions. So we understand that. We work with a lot of different types of contractors, and we have built multiple reference architectures and solutions for compliance for these customers. And so we're going to go through our 3 main reference architectures today and discuss how we built those, what they entail, and then some advantages and challenges to these solutions. So again, this is a quick agenda for today, and we'll go ahead and get started here. So David, why don't you go ahead and discuss what a reference architecture is? We use that term quite often when we're discussing it with our customers. I just referred to it as, we're going to discuss those today. So why don't you just discuss real quick what that is?
Reference architecture is a term that is a little bit loosely defined currently. It's used across multiple industries. So you'll see this term used in model houses, literally reference architecture that could be used for future builds. Microsoft started to put forward this concept of reference architectures around IT builds, and that in the IT world, when you talk about a reference architecture, that you're talking about a predefined solution for a particular domain and purpose typically. The solution itself has common elements that work together so that it is a full set of systems that can be deployed in a reusable and scalable architecture. So you can have one design, one architecture that is usable for many different use cases because it's been built to have all the bells and whistles that you need in your kit. From a security and compliance perspective, obviously we want this kit, this reference architecture to be built with the industry-leading technology where possible. And especially for compliance, we're looking at solutions that are FedRAMP compliant or CMMC compliant. So as you look at a reference architecture for IT and then a reference architecture further for compliance, the specifics of the elements within it allow us to have a engine, if you will, that we know will pass emissions and can be put into multiple body styles. If you look at a car as an example.
Great. Okay. So then we'd also discuss Enclave. So why don't you define what as we use the term Enclave, and again, it's a loose term out there. We hear it all the time, of course, when we're talking about security compliance.
Yeah, I think the same way the cloud started as a very loosely defined marketing term. What is the cloud? And then NIST came along and defined cloud, the definition of a cloud service. So NIST has done the same with Enclave. It's been used across many industries. When you talk about CMMC compliance and government compliance, you're looking toward the NIST publications. Special Publication Series 800 is going to define all of the government's views on how to comply. So 800-171 being the control set for CMMC, and the NIST glossary specifically defining how to use terms as you write your NIST 800-171 compliance docs. So for Enclave, unlike reference architecture, there is a NIST definition, and it does put forward a set of system resources that operate in the same security domain and share a continuous single common security perimeter. So a castle, if you will. And every time you complete building your castle wall, you've built yourself a castle. You could consider this standalone environment as an enclave. So our reference architectures are built to function as standalone, fully operational environments. That means any of our reference architectures could be used as an enclave. They could also be used as your whole corporate infrastructure. But generally, when you think of our reference architectures, if they're going to be used separate from your corporate network, you have a corporate network you don't want to retrofit, you're looking at building a brand new one. This would be the concept of building an enclave or enclaving. And with that, you'd expect that if your corporate network were to be attacked, hacked, and compromised, that your enclave system, because they don't share a security perimeter, would be just fine. So to the government, having an enclave where all the government data is, instead of putting it all into your corporate network, is a perfectly fine solution. They, in fact, are looking for you to apply least necessary access and privileges, and an enclave can help you do that.
And that's typically like the solution that we're talking about with customers, right? Especially with customers that do a lot of commercial work, things like that. We always end up talking about enclaves for their CUI data or for their government contract data. So that's a fairly common use for that, for an enclave, correct?
It is. And more you see companies looking to enclave their systems within their business anyway to implement segregation and separation so that if one business line of business goes down, another business will be fine. So some separation within the corporate network under the assume breach or zero trust model.
Right. Okay. Great. All right. So let's go. Let's dive a little deeper into the reference architectures. Again, we're going to discuss three of them today. They're the three most common ones we use for our customers. We have a few more, but the fact is probably 90% of our customers will fall into these one of these three reference architectures. So this is our reference architecture one, which is your standard corporate infrastructure type build, but you can kind of go through that a little bit here, David.
Yeah, so the key with this reference architecture one, we named it number one because it's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of a computer system. And most of us have used a workstation. Probably all of us have used a workstation. So the concept that you're familiar with a corporate workstation, you're familiar with email and Outlook, OneDrive, Teams, the Office suite, Word, PowerPoint, Excel. And most users of computers are comfortable with using the Microsoft 365 website at this point. So this build would get a company a secure workstation or mobile device, iOS, Android, and these secure devices are going to connect to a secure Microsoft 365 tenant. This allows us to say, if you as a user want to be able to download your data and take it offline, if you want to feel the simplicity of using a regular computer, your users are used to it, it's straightforward. The build itself allows for a small company to move into this RA1 and use this as their entire corporate build. If they're just 1, 2, 3 people, it allows a medium-sized company to think about purchasing this as a enclave, maybe just a couple users who want to keep it on their keep a separate computer on their desk. Maybe they only work from an office and they're okay with having a second computer. And for some of our biggest customers, looking at many RA1 builds for their different subsidiaries or operational units is really common, so that, again, each line of business becomes separated and can have some individual separation in terms of compromise.
Yeah, and well, you know, I know Enclave has been a big term, and we're going to discuss here Enclave reference architectures here soon. This architecture, or reference architecture 1, as we call it, is still probably one of the more common ones, correct? Because a lot of our customers that come to us, they, you know, several folks need access to CUI. CUI goes throughout the architecture, infrastructure, those kind of things. So the fact is that a lot of times, while Enclave may sound like a great solution, it does come back to this architecture.
Yeah, it's the same architecture. If you use it as an enclave, great. If it's the right solution for your whole business, that's great too. Microsoft has for a long time offered this workstation management model, and they want this to work for small and big companies. And our reference architecture 1 does the same. So big companies can buy many of them. Small companies could put their whole organization in there. And a lot of the medium companies look at this as an enclave solution, separate from their operational corporate environment.
And you mentioned 2 workstations on desk for some companies, you know, employees that will have, you know, their corporate infrastructure workstation, and right next to it, they'll have their CUI workstation. We have customers doing that today.
We do, and we see that with engineering a lot. If it's a physical desktop for the engineer, it's not a big deal to have another physical desktop on the other side of their desk, especially if it's a very occasional, you know, every once in a while I have to edit a document I know is CUI, or I spend half my day working on this computer here and half my day working on this computer here. We've seen that work really well, especially for people who, again, just like the physical interface and don't want to have any of the complications about data flow or virtual desktops, you know, not having to think through which computer am I using mentally. It can make this solution really helpful for end users.
Okay. All right. So reference architecture 2, this is pretty much our first one that a lot of folks would consider an enclave. Why don't you go ahead and discuss this one, Dave?
Yeah, this reference architecture, like you said, most people would think enclave and you think cloud, right? Right away, you're thinking, oh, my enclave, it must be in the cloud. And that's, I think, why with reference architecture 1, it is typically used as a whole corporate build, but many times is used as an enclave as well. This reference architecture 2 gets you a virtual desktop. When you move to a virtual desktop, it's all in the cloud. There's no physical workstation being issued, and the workstations coming to the picture, the workstations that you're bringing to the picture, in this case, we're going to categorize as CRMA or contractor risk managed assets. This is NeoSystems hedging our bets here with the CMMC writing on asset scoping. Generally, we feel these devices are incapable of storing the data from your virtual desktop. They are session-based and out of scope from a FISMA and FedRAMP perspective. Obviously, this is still playing out from a CMMC perspective. So to be safe, your devices that come to the enclave or virtual desktop solution, we would categorize as contractor risk managed assets. We want to inventory these either through the individual workstations or a class of workstations, like workstations, that meet certain criteria. So generally, these are asset inventoried, but considered otherwise out of scope. So you're looking at a virtual desktop solution that is a hosted desktop, gets your users the access to the whole productivity suite that is Microsoft, email and Outlook and Planner and Teams, but it also allows them to have a virtual desktop, which is Windows 10. So they have their personal computing environment that is up in the cloud and accessed through a web browser, keeping their workstation out of scope at very minimum into this CRMA category, which is from a regulatory perspective, technically in scope, but to a minimal degree.
Yeah, and the value here is, right, that all the data, the CUI, stays in that cloud boundary, right? So in itself, when you're looking at writing all your processes and procedures and your 110 controls, I mean, what we're looking at is putting that boundary, that cloud boundary under scope, correct?
That's correct. So everything in blue in this picture would be considered CUI assets authorized to operate with controlled unclassified information, and we would prove it to the auditor. So part of this program we're selling here is turnkey solutions where we'll build the tech, but wrap it in a program where NeoSystems would write the data for the 110 controls, the 282 if you're using the assessment guide, and provide the writing on our technology, what we do, and guide our customers through what they need to do, their customer responsibility, which is typically going to be the administrative controls, background checks, and training, et cetera.
Yeah, also, I noticed here in blue, I see hosted applications optional. Can you discuss what that means real quick?
Hosted applications are slightly different than hosted desktop. Hosted desktop is going to be a Windows 10 operating system, a cloud computer. A hosted application sitting next to your cloud computer can be very useful. And we see this quite a bit for data transfer through electronic file transfer software, or for engineering software that maybe is host and client based. So you need a server to run some of the software, and each of the hosted desktops needs to run its own client-based software to connect to that server. So once we set up your virtual desktops, deploying more of the environment to handle applications that like to be run on a server environment can be installed. And this would include applications that require graphics processing. In past, graphics processing is required for 3D modeling or rendering. For a lot of the CAD type programs, you're looking at the need for additional specs on your graphics processing unit, GPU. These Azure virtual desktops can be deployed with virtual graphics processing capabilities and can be attached to a server that runs the architecture and applications. So if you're looking at a build where you want to take your engineers from on-premise, which has typically been the need for 3D modeling and rendering, and you want to get them into the cloud, these reference architecture to have that capability, and we've deployed that several times now, and with great success.
Right, we have several customers using this architecture today, right? And what we're seeing a lot of times is that this architecture is definitely used when some of these, especially commercial companies that do a lot of commercial work, engineering companies that do have a large commercial division but a smaller DoD division, where they need these applications in the cloud as well, because they need those applications to either view, create, or edit the CUI. So they can't just have the data up there, they also need these applications.
That's right. That's right. And you want the app to be right next to the desktop in the cloud to continue to have that cloud-based security perimeter.
Okay. All right. So the next reference architecture here, we're talking about reference architecture 3. Now, this is, again, an Enclave architecture, and this is one that we put in our own cloud.
That's right. The picture for this green and blue looks extremely similar to the last one. And the general layout is very similar to the last one. As far as you get a virtual desktop or hosted desktop, you can do hosted applications optionally. The difference here is that for many companies, their corporate build is in Microsoft.com, and their workstations are managed under their corporate build. And they want a hosted desktop, but they don't want to deal with any of the complications that come with 2 Microsoft environments. If you are comfortable using Microsoft Word on your computer, you open it up on your computer, you see it on your computer, you're logged into it through your corporate email. If you have a second corporate email and you need to log into a different Microsoft Word, at times that can be confusing for the users, and to some degree can be a conflict on the workstation, depending on your use case and how much of how heavy the hooks for corporate are on your workstation. So looking at a non-Microsoft solution, a solution that's not in Microsoft.com, is attractive to a lot of our customers. The other advantage of the main advantage I see with our cloud-based desktop is bandwidth. We have a lot of customers that have heavy bandwidth needs, moving lots of data around and needing lots of long-term storage. Our cloud-based environment handles that really well. We don't charge ingress egress fees. So we've often built this out for customers who need a workstation in the cloud. They need a lot of data processing. They're not so interested in email at all. They maybe go to a government website, they download the data they need, or when they're done, they upload the data they need. For example, C3PAO, writing a report. This is a great example for, great environment for them to log into, write their report, save it, and then upload it to a government website. So they're going to use Microsoft Word and a browser, and that's really all they need. They don't need email, and they don't want email because that would conflict with their old environments. So they're looking for a more streamlined, straightforward, stripped down base kind of a package, and that's what we've put together here in our cloud.
Yeah, this is a real common approach we have for companies who call us and say, look, they get very little CUI. Maybe they get a few documents a year. They know what those documents are, and a lot of times they just have to view them. Maybe they just need to edit them in Word, or they need to do a table in Excel or something like that. But very common solution for companies like that.
It is. And you see the government doing a lot of file sharing through their own file sharing tools or through partnering with cloud services, and they'll send a link. Click this link to view the data, which, as I mentioned before, brings a untrusted computer to see CUI. So the government's inherently doing this already, and they have for a long time through FISMA and FedRAMP, this cloud-based model where the device is untrusted. So when you look at that same cloud-based model and the device is untrusted, if you need to download this data, you've broken the rules. So for a long time, viewing in a cloud service has been a good workaround for the government to share this data. But as soon as you need to manipulate the data and bring it off that website and down to some personal computing device, you have the need for some sort of hosted desktop solution like this. A place, even if they're just small modifications, a place to make those modifications. So the solution works great for that. And I would also note that under the current 800-171 model, we see a lot of our customers come to us to say, yes, of course, I've signed DFARS contracts. I have contracts that say DFAR 7012. However, I've never gotten any marked data. So I don't believe I have any covered contractor systems. That's a pretty valid argument. If I don't have any covered systems, how can I be at risk? How can I be putting CUI at risk if I've never gotten any CUI? Why would I be a risk to the government? That's a pretty strong argument. CMMC closes that loophole in saying that prior to doing business with the government, you must attain CMMC certification. And that prior to and must attain means an operational system that's up, running, has a system security plan. It can't be a conceptual future system that you will take through audit that would be able to process CUI, and it has to all be running before you ever even get CUI. So I think for a lot of the companies that have been looking at this as, well, I don't get CUI, but I've signed contracts, but I don't get CUI. The act of signing the contract will become prohibited unless you've already passed your CUI compliance rules in future. That change with CMMC is probably the biggest change. It's not follow the data. It means build a system with a clear perimeter, write a plan for it, present it at audit, and then you can ink the deal on the contracts you want to sign. So that pre-build model is forcing a lot of our clients into saying, I've never seen the data, but I have to have a system to process it should I in future see it. And we're seeing a lot more agencies marking, and we're seeing a lot more primes doing marking of CUI. So even if they've never seen it to date, we're seeing a lot of customers need these because they're starting to see more marked data and they're trying to prep for the CMMC program.
Yeah, this is, we've used this already a few times, right? It's almost like a step one for some companies because they need something to say that they're compliant. Either they go back to their prime contractor because their prime is requiring compliance, or if they're the prime itself, but they need a system to state that, hey, we have a compliance system according to our contract. So this is kind of like almost a step one. And as we've seen, some companies have then graduated from this type of solution and saying, let's just put everybody in the Enclave, or let's make the Enclave bigger and better, or add more applications or whatever. But a lot of times this is kind of like a step one, wouldn't you say?
Would, and it's hard to tell if you've only ever worked with commercial and sort of less secure environments, whether or not your practices, your user practices will run into problems in a secure environment. And we found that a lot of our customers, when they start getting this solution RA3 in our cloud or RA2 or RA1, that the user base is fine, that things that they thought might hamper their corporate users and prevent them from moving their entire organization in this direction really aren't true. So why not consolidate down? So start with an enclave, and then, as you say, graduate to just moving this to their entire corporate build.
Exactly. Okay. So let's talk real quick about some of the advantages of each of the builds. Now, for the folks in the audience, you're going to be receiving a poll question. So if you could just answer that poll question as it's coming across, we'll continue on with the presentation here. But if you can answer the poll question, then the screen will come back up full. So David, let's talk real quick about the advantages of the enclave, and then we can kind of go into the corporate infrastructure build as well.
Sure. Advantages of enclave: the level of effort is typically much lower. Retrofitting an environment is very difficult. It means in first discovering what that environment was built for, how it's been used in past, and then making sure that your new build repeats and recovers all of those same functions. So there's both a hefty lift in the discovery process, and then there's a hefty lift in the migration process, and a hefty lift in the new implementation of your new environment for all your new users. So if you're looking at a whole corporate lift and shift and move, you have to understand that that's going to be a one-time painful experience. Nobody likes change, and change is difficult for end users, and especially when it comes to their computing devices. So while there are advantages to the entire corporate infrastructure below, from an enclave perspective, if you can get away with it, building a small purpose-built greenfield, brand new build for a couple of users has a far lower amount of effort. The time to compliance is obviously represented in that same equation as much faster. You're building an environment that's purpose-built, it's smaller, it has less users, it doesn't need all the bells and whistles. There's no discovery of what was there before. You're purchasing a pre-built, pre-designed engine, if you will, that already passes emissions. So you don't have to spend all the time trying to custom build your engine. You can just look to purchase one. So level of effort is lower, time to compliance is faster. Maintaining compliance in a small environment is far easier. All of the administrative checks: who are the people? What accounts do they have? Have they been assigned roles? And do they have role-based access? If you have thousands of users, that question takes quite a bit of time. If you have 5 users, it takes a lot less time. So maintaining compliance for our customers, their responsibilities on who are the people and what roles do they have, goes down quite a bit. And then with that overall effort, no discovery, no custom planning for your house, no custom building for your future reference architecture or house, right? All of those add up to a lower cost. So when you look at a compliant environment, it's inevitably going to be more costly than a not compliant environment, because all of the security tools and processes cost money. So even though the enclave tech is more expensive, and inevitably will be, by simplifying it down to a smaller number of users and a more direct use case, the cost of these enclaves comes out lower than trying to retrofit a whole environment where 5 out of 100 people are going to be using CUI.
Right. And I think, because so many folks are talking about enclaves, and yes, there are some advantages there. But where the advantages are there's also advantages to our corporate infrastructure build too. Is what correct?
Yeah, and that's why we built these reference architectures to do both. It's unclear. The goalposts are moving. We're not working on a CMMC program that was defined and has been the same forever. We're working on a CMMC program where goalposts are consistently moving. We're sort of on a shifting sands position here. So we're looking at wanting to be flexible with our reference architecture builds in order to make it easier on the defense industrial based community, so that you can start with one and, as you say, graduate into another, or that you can start with one and just put a toe in the water and realize it's not the right one for you, backtrack and switch into a different reference architecture. These time to build, getting the time to build and time to compliance down allows our customers to do a little bit of that mix and match and figure out what is the right solution, whether it is RA123, whether it's an enclave or the entire corporate build. It's hard to foresee. So entire corporate build works best for companies that don't know where their CUI is right now and are expecting to find that more than half of their people typically are involved in this. You're looking at a position where if you're about to split your company into two and have two builds, that starts to feel like now at least half of these people have two licenses in Microsoft. They have two computers, one maybe is virtual. You're getting to a tipping point where maybe it's best to just bite the bullet, do the one-time move to a new corporate environment in GCC or GCC High, get everybody into a NSC virtual desktop solution, something like that. If you're starting to see a higher percentage, or just interwoven processes that you can't unwind, that would be too difficult to unwind, things like special application licensing, trying to figure out how to license the same software in two environments. Some of those challenges make enclaving not the right idea. It just doesn't look like you're going to get the right economy of scale. Right. You can't get your IT people to run two environments with the number of staff you have. So enclaves can be attractive, but just really aren't always the solution, especially if you're heavily into the space as a whole corporation.
Yeah, and I think, again, efficiency matters, right? So I think for a lot of these companies, you have to take a look at, are you going to affect so poorly the efficiency of how your operation runs, how your organization runs, that, having two separate builds, two separate environments, folks have to be trained on two separate environments. It becomes too daunting, right?
It does. And the use case, again, if you're one of these people that now has two email accounts, if that's a small number of people and they're pretty savvy users, that's a great solution. It's fantastic. Right. If you have users that you feel like are going to be overwhelmingly confused when you try to give them complex UI training, they're going to fail at it. And if you put, as a business, if your concept of IT is to give people solutions that are going to fail, that's probably a bad start. And it's a bad start for IT. It's a horrendous start for compliance, because now you're going to have users that break your own rules, and you will have shot yourself in the foot and self-report that you had a CUI spillage because you built your own system so complicated that you couldn't achieve it. And that's a failure we see repeatedly with companies that try to walk this tightrope in their planning and their documentation. And then every user on their account list breaks these rules.
Yeah,
and they're asking, should we report this? It's a bit like, don't write yourself into a corner. Make sure you build a plan that really can work.
Right. And the main thing is, again, back to the enclave solution, is you have to be able to separate the data, right? You have to know the data you're getting. You have to know who's going to use that data. And some companies that you just don't have the ability to do that. So again, you have to go back to the full infrastructure build. So we've seen both, and there's value in both solutions, but there's challenges of both solutions as well, both types of solutions. And I think those are the things that we typically discuss when we first start working with customers, and is trying to figure out, what is that right solution. But the fact is, it's going to have to be flexibility. You may end up changing that idea once you get further deep into it and figure out what your data flows are. And
these enclaves are meant to mix and match, right? We understand too that many people are looking at a situation where, of their maybe 50 people that are going to be using the enclave, maybe half want a physical workstation and half want a virtual workstation. That's fine. You can look at RA1 and RA2 as your solution combined together. So you're issuing both workstations and virtual workstations out of the same Microsoft tenant. You could also conceive of buying those as separate cars. So instead of saying, I want RA1 and RA2 out of the same Microsoft tenant, so virtual and physical workstations, but all using the same email. If you want some people in a virtual workstation environment, and they're going to be completely separate from other people in a physical workstation environment. Again, as a big company, corporations that have many operational units and subsidiaries, that's a great model. It allows the corporate-wide control over many tenants, if you will, where they're each individual and separate, but they can manage them all as one unit because they all look the same as a configuration item.
Right. Okay, here. Let's see. Okay, so real quick, we'll discuss some of the expected costs here that folks could entail here. So the main thing to first understand is what is included when you're thinking about costs for these solutions. Is first you need to understand what is included in that cost structure. What you're going to want to all make sure that you understand is when you go down the path of whether it's a Enclave solution or corporate build is make sure you understand from your provider what they're including with their costs. You need to have some type of security program management there. There needs to be the ongoing continuous monitoring portion of this, someone that's working with you throughout. They can't just, you're going to want to make sure that your provider is going to be there not only as you build the program, but to keep the program compliant and then be there with you through audit. You're going to need someone to be doing these the management of your IT program and your 365 environment. Microsoft does make changes to this to that environment, and so you do want to make sure that you're going with somebody that knows how to keep an eye out for that, is going to be continuously managing it, and be able to ensure that your environment stays compliant. And maybe get compliant when you first set it up, but a year later it won't be compliant anymore if someone isn't keeping an eye on that. Got to make sure that the environment itself is going to be fully compliant. So again, the way we build is all of our reference architectures are a compliant build. So that means that the environment's got to be scanned, logged. There's got to be change control towards that environment, configuration management, all those things that are part of the CMMC process. Ensure that the environment that you're purchasing is going to have that. And the fact that, and the last is, make sure if you're going to need those additional applications, make sure that whatever's being built for you be able to handle that, or that your provider can get those to you. So again, just because you can view or scan or see the data is great, but if you need to manipulate that data, if you need to see it in a certain application, make sure that whatever's being built for you is going to be able to handle that. Again, all of our architecture builds, our enclaves and everything does cover all those 4 items. So make sure whatever you're going with, you'll have the same thing. So what are the typical costs here? From the low end, we've seen these costs as little as $2,000 to $3,000 a month. And so, and what we're talking about is your typical enclave build, or even your very small corporate reference architecture as the corporate infrastructure build. The main thing there is, what are the additional costs as you add users? Typically, from a corporate infrastructure build, your per cost per workstation is going to be much higher. Your cost will increase much quicker from the corporate infrastructure build. Your enclave builds are usually, your initial build will be, higher cost, if you will, from 1 or 2 workstations. But then as you add users, typically, because of the processing power in these enclaves, it can usually accept a lot more users at a lower cost. So typically what you'll see is, as you get more users in an enclave, the cost per user is lower than your cost per user in a corporate infrastructure build. Again, when you're talking about cost, you have to look at what's the level of effort from both your provider and from yourself, because when you're doing a corporate infrastructure, the level of effort is always going to be much higher. You're going to have really a change throughout your organization. A lot more folks need to be trained. A lot more workstations need to get to compliance, that kind of thing. So your corporate infrastructure build in itself, your level of effort will be much higher than in an enclave. So make sure you take that into factor as well. It's not just the cost as your provider gives them to you, it's also your internal level of effort that you're going to have to take a look at. Okay, so steps to take now. So David, we talk to companies all the time. They're like, well, what should I do next? Or what should I do as I'm preparing to start working with you guys?
Right. And our first question is always going to be, did you sign a DFARS contract yet? Have you decided to do business with the DoD yet? And that sounds like, of course I did, right? But we have a lot of customers that are brand new and maybe haven't even made up a product yet. They're looking to sell to the DoD, and they want to make sure they build their architecture from day one into something that will allow them to sell to the DoD, which is very smart. So have you decided to do business with the DoD? Have you already signed a contract that brings you into DFARS as far as must comply today? If so, then you're in a different boat. If you don't have any of those today and you're thinking about it in future, good for you. Prepare, build toward. If you've already signed one, you need to figure out which contracts you signed it in. For very large organizations, this can be months, year-long effort to go through all of their contracts. for small organizations, it may be, of course, we know the one we've signed with the DoD or with a prime. So contracts or work orders or service agreements, the terminology and the regulation is any kind of contractual vehicle is intended to be covered here. So if you're saying, well, I don't get contracts or SOWs, they have a different name. The name of them isn't going to matter. If you're performing work for an upstream provider who has themselves been put under this regulation, they need to make you aware of that and flow down the DFARS clause to you. And as soon as you get that clause, you need to think about how you deliver and make sure the products you're working with or the vendors you're working with are flowing, you're flowing those same requirements down. So look at your contracts and see if you committed, but also look at your contracts with vendors that you're relying on to make sure that if you need to flow down, you've done that as well.
Right. And also, companies can start, they don't need to wait to work with a provider. They can start looking at what their boundary is today, right? I mean, how do they get CUI? What do you do with the CUI when you get it? What do you need to do with it as far as you need to send it to someone else? Those are all things that, when we first start talking to companies, that sometimes they haven't even gone that path. And these are things you can do on your own before you even engage with a provider.
Because what's going to happen is you're going to feel like, okay, what should I do? And your provider is going to respond to you. Do you know if you have any contracts with CUI in them? And do you handle it today? The best thing you can do if you handle it today, you might be doing it almost perfect, but you maybe didn't write down what you do. That's the ideal scenario. So if you can, before purchasing a solution, understand which contracts have this data, roundabout who handles it and how, you will have taken a giant step forward in the discovery process and be able to communicate, here's what we do today. Is this good enough? If so, let's write it down and move forward. If not, we'll maybe try to make tweaks to your current process. The goal is typically to take what you're up to today and try to make it compliant. If you know what you're up to today isn't compliant, our reference architectures are going to put forward a scheme. We want you to, in reference architecture 1, store on your workstation, store in particular pre-built SharePoint sites we've given you. If you need new ones, here's directions on how to build new CUI sites. Here's how we want you to do sensitivity labeling. So in our designs, we're prescriptive as far as what we want you to do. So if you don't want to go through discovery and this is brand new, then you're going to learn from us how we intend for you to use our reference architectures. If this is something you're already doing and you do plan to retrofit your corporate environment, same starting point, understand your contracts, understand your data flows.
Right. And these are all part of the discussion we'll have with you. That's correct. Okay. Hey, Don, do we have any questions that have come in?
We do, Greg. In fact, we had a question come in the days leading up to the webinar that I wanted to bring forward, and then we can get to the questions that are in the Q&A area. The question that came in was, does CMMC cover ransomware? So I'm sure a lot of people out there are wondering about that. So can you address that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and it's very common because obviously it's a lot in the news today, right? So we hear a lot of times of, how does this affect ransomware? David, you want to kind of discuss that?
Sure. Financial motive is the driving factor to all attacks. Hackers are a for-profit business. So when you look at research over the last many, many years, the driving factor is financial motivation. So ransomware is great at that. You get paid right away. Ransomware on an individual computer is very successful at getting paid. Here is a package that's locked your computer. Here is a number for you to pay me. And if you don't pay me, I won't unlock your computer. Ransomware has grown from that individual style of attack to corporate-wide ransomware or denial of service for ransom, where you can't even get into your company anymore and they want you to pay a ransom to get there. That's direct money in an attacker's pocket. And then the exposure for ransom concept is becoming even more popular, where they steal your data and they encrypt your copies and they tell you, you got to pay me to decrypt your copies. And then they come back and tell you have to pay me again if you don't want me to release the data I stole. So you're in a bit of a bind here, even if you did the right thing. So does CMMC cover that? Basically, no. Backups are not included. This isn't a availability standard. We're focused on confidentiality and integrity of the data. The availability component of security is purposely left out of the 800.171 writing. The recovery family was struck down out of CMMC 1.0 to 2.0. So does it cover it? The word isn't in there. No. Do they attempt to look at this as a threat that the community is facing? Yes. But ransomware being seen as something that doesn't necessarily until recently involve exposure of data. I think this kind of attack and whether or not you're able to maintain your mission is oddly left out. The fact that this is one of the most common attack vectors, and that the best way to recover from this is to have backups, and that backups are not included in CMMC, a little bit strange. However, Neo's builds are zero trust architecture, and we do backups. Our concept is if not when, when not if. So you will be attacked. That is clear. All organizations get attacked all the time from the broader internet. So we're focused on incident response and planning, working with our customers on what to do if they see this. We implement secure baseline configurations on the workstation to make it harder for an attacker to get a foothold. We remove the ability for the end users to install apps. So again, as an attacker, even if you get a foothold, it's hard for you to get your malware that will do the ransomware on the box. If you do get the malware on the box, when it runs, its behavior can be seen by behavior-based endpoint protection, which would be running on the box. So it would see this as ransomware-like behavior and try to kill it in execution. And then if it does successfully fire beyond all that, we've got log data on the workstation to see when and where the compromise came from and if it spread. And we do backup of the data so that once we've determined where it came from and corrected the situation, we can recover and reconstitute the data onto healthy systems.
Right. And I think if anything, where CMMC comes into play is at least it gets you going down that path of understanding your incident response plans. So in itself, you know what to do. You're not, you don't feel like you're in an emergency situation. You've already discussed it. You kind of know where you're going to do, what your plan is. And I think if anything CMMC gives you from a ransomware perspective is at least it has you go through that process.
It's in the prevent mode. That's right. It makes it harder, but they oddly leave out the recover mode. So,
okay. All right, Don, I think we have, you said you might have a couple more questions that we might be able to answer quickly. Hey, Don?
Yes, Greg, sorry. The first question that came in was one asking about which 365 environment was used for the RA2.
It can be either the government community cloud or the government community cloud high, GCC or GCC high. We are under the view that both environments can become compliant with CMMC, and depending on your use case and your use of export controlled data and your need for the US sovereign cloud that Microsoft offers, you would want to make the decision. But RA1 and RA2 are both available in both the government community cloud and the GCC high environments.
Great. There's another question here regarding what certifications do we have for the NeoSystems cloud? For example, FedRAMP Moderate. Is the NeoSystems cloud on top of a third-party cloud? And how does NeoSystems support DFARS 7012 C through G?
NeoSystems has gone through for the FedRAMP Ready process for moderate compliance for the past 3-4 years. We do not attain an authority to operate under FedRAMP Moderate with an agency sponsor. If any of you are from an agency and want to sponsor us, we'd love that. The FedRAMP program is built for providing services to the federal government, unfortunately. So there's a bit of a catch-22 with FedRAMP in that NeoSystems target market is the government contractor community. And in order to gain FedRAMP Moderate authority to operate, you have to sell services directly to an agency. That is, again, a bit of a catch-22. So we are FedRAMP ready. We achieve the paperwork and the hardest controls that are FedRAMP, but until we would have an agency sponsor or go through the FedRAMP Moderate program, we're looking at FedRAMP Ready as being respectable, helpful, the best that we can achieve as a private community company, but understand that reciprocity has not yet been defined between FedRAMP Moderate and CMMC, likely to be in future, but we understand that we'll be beholden to DFARS and C through G clauses. So we do intend to go through the DIBCAC audit as soon as possible, and or go through a C3PAO audit to achieve CMMC compliance for our NeoSystems cloud, understanding again that FedRAMP has not necessarily meshed well with the CMMC program so far.
And we're also ITAR compliant, SOC 1, we have SOC 1 and SOC 2. So
that's true. That's true.
Right.
Okay, a few more questions here that I think we can try to squeeze in. First is your Enclave deployed in a GCC high tenant, or do customers have a choice to pick commercial for a lesser cost?
Commercial is not available, but commercial and GCC cost the same per license. So if you're in a commercial environment and you don't have export control data, you should be moving to a GCC environment straight away. The features and functions have most parity, and the cost per license is the same. So GCC is the minimum we'll build. Commercial is not authorized for CUI data. It's not the government community cloud, it's the commercial cloud. So unfortunately, that enterprise or commercial cloud is not compliant, doesn't get the stamp of approval you need, or that NeoSystems believes you need in our work with Microsoft.
Okay, another question. How do you provide secure access to CUI data for third parties, such as suppliers, subcontractors, etc.?
If you are about to provide CUI to a third party, you must have flowed down to that third party in a contract prior to giving them the data that makes them aware and allows them an opportunity to sign a contract stating, I will also comply with CMMC. So your responsibility is to look at your vendor contracts and flow them down. Do we have solutions that would help you with that? Absolutely. Should your vendor also be writing a system security plan? Yes. So NeoSystems, looking at our reference architecture, as part of our goal is to enable the defense industrial base, understanding there's a lot of small companies that have never even heard of this and are going to have to become compliant. So if you need help with your subcontractors, these reference architectures can help. That's what we see with our big corporate companies that say, I want to buy many reference architecture ones. Or you could look at reference architecture one and slim down version of our security program for your vendor. So we have programs like that where you can purchase your solution from us and then purchase a deal for your subsidiaries and work with us on that process. Your subsidiaries or vendors, contractors.
Yeah, because there's different, the main answer there also is what do your subcontractors need, right? Do they just need to view the data? Do they need to actually get in there and manipulate the data? So there's a few different factors that come into play. And then like what David was saying is, even for them to have that type of access, at a minimum, they're going to need some type of system security plan, some type of knowledge that the folks who are looking at that data have had background checks and those kind of things. So there are some requirements. Now, there aren't the computing requirements, because the computing environment would be owned by you as being that prime contractor in that sense. But the fact is that the access to that environment, there are some requirements there. So and again, we have solutions around that as well.
Yeah, so the tech would work for you and your customers, or sorry, your subcontractors. The tech, the reference architecture, the program part has to apply to you and to them. So there is a bit of a responsibility there where they write their own plan, and we'll help them with that too. Again, if we build the tech for you and you're going to use it and your subs are going to use it, that's fine. You just need more than one system security plan in that process so that everybody's crossing their T's and dotting their I's appropriately.
Right.
Great. So one more question we have here, and one note there, Craig, you did submit a question. We will get back to you separately on that. That's going to take a little bit more of a detailed answer, so we will respond to you directly on that. But the last question we have here is that this person's understanding was that there was no virtual desktop available in the GCC high environment. Are we saying that it is able to do that?
Yes.
We're deploying today.
I guess. Yeah, that's not something I've heard. So I hope so. Otherwise, our .us virtual desktops, I don't know where they are.
Yeah. So the answer would be yes. There, you can do it in GCC high.
Okay, so I think that's about the time we have, Greg. So I think if you want to go ahead and move to that final slide here, then we can go ahead and wrap up.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks everyone for attending today. It was great to have this discussion. Looking forward to the feedback. I know we've had a few more questions come in. We'll try and get back to everyone on those, and then also make this presentation available.
Yes, so we will make the presentation available as well as the on-demand recording, and we'll let you know how to access that within the next day or two. So please keep an eye out for that. So if you have any questions for Greg or David, their email addresses are right there on the screen. Certainly you can reach us on our website as well, there at the bottom of the screen. So thanks everyone for attending. Greg and David, thank you all very much for your time today. It was a great presentation. And we look forward to seeing everyone on our next NeoSystems event. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.